Anyway, now the first and better known one is the story of Hades and Persephone, and that one boils down to Hades is lonely and kidnaps Persephone to be his wife. Persephone's mom Demeter objects and refuses to let anything grow until she's returned. Something something pomegranate, something something 6 months of winter. It's a little bit like the Osiris thing in that Persephone becomes a goddess of the underworld because by eating the food of the dead, she becomes something of the dead. She didn't actually die, but the concept is the same. Now, I really only like this story in its more modern interpretation where Persephone had a modicum of agency in the story and actually likes Hades, willingly becoming the queen of the underworld rather than just being kidnapped and getting the munchies. But forget all that, because now that that's done, let's talk about Hera. So Zeus sends him away to be raised in secret. Exactly who raises him varies from telling to telling, with foster parents ranging from Hermes, the titaness Rhea, the mortal king Athamas, and Queen Ino, who raise him as a girl, and even Persephone. Let's also make note of his connection to Persephone in this version. This is all going to come together later, I promise. So he acknowledged. There's also, fun fact, no Mycenaean equivalent to Hades, although Persephone and Demeter are both Mycenaean in origin. Anyway, regardless of who they used to be, by the time ancient Greece as we think of Dionysus has been equated with another figure called Zagreus, and it's unclear whether this was a later syncretism or an early case of multiple names for one god. Orphism, side note, was a 6th century BC religion that basically boiled down to an attempt to understand life and death. It mostly worshipped gods or figures that entered the underworld and left alive, like Orpheus, hence the name Orphic. Other noteworthy figures of worship included Persephone, for fairly obvious reasons. But working from this definition, it's unclear why Dionysus would have caught the attention of a cult focused on death and rebirth when it seems like the farthest we can stretch his characterization at this point is drunk and rowdy. What connection did Dionysus have with the underworld that would cause an Orphic cult to favor him? Let's talk about an older story of Dionysus' birth. The first difference between Orphic Dionysus and plain vanilla Dionysus is that he's the son of Zeus and Persephone, while in older fragmentary myths, Zagreus is instead the son of Hades and Persephone. Whichever way the parentage swings, Orphic Dionysus is slated to inherit Zeus' status as king of the gods, which enrages Hera, who gets a bunch of titans to murder baby Orphic Dionysus by ripping him apart and eating him. Athena saves his heart, and with Zeus' help gets him reborn, either by doing the leg implant thing again or sticking the heart in Semele so she can grow a baby around it. Either way, Orphic Dionysus gets reborn after being ritualistically shredded and gets on with the whole being a god thing. This myth predates his Semele parentage and possibly predates ancient Greece overall, since the Mycenaean characterization also featured this theme of dying and being reborn early in life. It handily contextualizes both his theme of rebirth and his weird connection with Persephone that we touched on earlier, as well as giving him an unexpected link with the underworld that we don't see much of in his later characterization. This is strengthened by his Zagreus epithet. Zagreus in his earliest references isn't explicitly connected with Dionysus, but he is strongly linked with Hades and the underworld in general. In his earliest references from around the 600s BC, it's not even clear if he and Hades are different entities, and he's hugely important in the underworld hierarchy. Zagreus as a standalone entity seems to have been a very important chthonic god, and by appending his name to Dionysus, Dionysus inherits his strong underworld connections. Going back as far as we can, the Mycenaean inscriptions we have confirm that Dionysus' death and rebirth, as well as his status as a son of Zeus, were original elements of his characterization, not later additions by his Orphic cult. He's also got some themes of being abandoned by humanity and raised by nature, which might play into his later nature and animalistic associations. So this gives us something of a starting point. Dionysus enters the ancient Greek world as a god of death and rebirth with strong connections to the underworld. Those underworld connections appeal to the later Orphic religious movement, causing his characterization to get a bit schizophrenic as they put focus on an element of his characterization otherwise largely being left behind. Anyway, this alternative birth myth gives us something of a feel for where his characterization started, but doesn't really explain why he would have been excluded from the Hellenistic pantheon. And we also haven't put together where his wine connection came from yet. So now let's talk about what his personal cult can tell us about.
One day, Persephone was out in a field and she was picking flowers with her posse. You know, just as you do. Teenage girls running around picking flowers. That's what we do, girls. Apparently. Now, Hades really wants to ask Persephone out, but he's too weird and shy and geeky about it, and so instead he asks his mum, Gaia, the Earth, to send Persephone a really pretty flower, just a single flower that'll grow right in front of Persephone, that'll be the most beautiful flower she's ever seen. And Gaia does, and it works, and it's this gorgeous, gorgeous little flower that Persephone instantly stops and tries to pick. Thanks, Mom! But then, out of nowhere, Hades stops being just a shy, geeky person and turns into a complete crazy weirdo because he bursts out of the ground in his golden chariot up from Hades and just grabs Persephone, snatches her and kidnaps her, turns around, goes straight back down into the underworld again. Who knows why he chose to go in his chariot for this trip, because it seems like a really short trip to be making via Golden Chariot, but he did. So, I mean, that's a thing. Just up and dives back down again. Now, the only people who hear Persephone's cries for help are Hecate, the goddess of magic who lives in the underworld, and Helios, god of the sun, and he heard it because he sees everything. Now, it only takes Demeter a really little while to realize that her daughter has gone missing. And Demeter starts wandering around for 9 days, fasting the whole time, and asking people if they know what's happened to Persephone. Finally, Demeter runs into Hecate, who says, I heard Persephone crying out for help, but I didn't see what happened. You know who will have seen it though? The sun, because he sees everything. Let's you and me go ask Helios what exactly went down. So the two of them go and see Helios, who immediately spills the beans and says that Persephone was kidnapped by Hades because Hades had a total crush on her. This is not the way, Hades. This is not the way. Demeter demands that her brother Zeus intervene in what's going on, but Zeus says that he doesn't even care. He doesn't want to get involved in this. And so then Demeter is all just like, well, fine. No crops for you then. So Demeter disguised herself as an old woman and went into full-on mourning mode, traveling the earth and just weeping for
about.
Fairest of maidens, I've chosen you to be queen of my kingdom below.
So here in the adolescence of both film and animation as medium, we have our fabulous Red River Pants opera singing Hades. This one has some more obvious influences than the Greek god himself.
Could it be Satan?
Well, yes, church lady, but some perhaps less obvious than that. The satanified version of Hades is highly influenced by a Greek god, just not the one for which he is named. In this case, we're talking about Pan. The little horns, the pointy goatee, these are elements associated with Pan, whose aesthetic later got rolled up into Christian artistic depictions of Satan. But a solid popularization for this look comes from Mephistopheles, who is not Satan, but close enough. One look need no further than Gounod's Faust, by which this cartoon is probably more heavily influenced than by anything. The god Hades also isn't really associated with fire like he is here. He is associated with wealth, metals, minerals, precious gems, which we kind of see here.
I give you this diamond, behold its size.
I guess this counts. I already did an episode about the goddess of spring a couple years ago, so we won't go into too much depth on this one other than besides the aesthetic influences. It's pretty much a strangely Demeter-less version of the abduction of Persephone by way of Faust. So, -1 eating the fruit of the underworld, +1...
Very well, I let you go.
Quite reasonable of you, Satan Hades. Next.
This is the story of a time.
Knowledge of Greek mythology, but let's run through a quick refresher where Mr. Hades is concerned. Okay, so the 3 Lord God patriarchs of the Greek pantheon are the brothers 3, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Zeus rules the heaven and the earth, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld and the dead people. Now, Zeus and Poseidon are massive pricks. Hades, by comparison, is the nice one. Aside from the occasional kidnapping, he mostly keeps to himself. In the mythology, his role was usually the bearer of some kind of quest object or dead love interest of the hero. His name, Hades, also became synonymous with the underworld itself. So it's like if my apartment was called Lindsay. Hi, I'm Lindsay. Welcome to Lindsay. The most famous story of Hades from the mythology, hell, one of the most famous stories from Greek mythology period, is the abduction of Persephone. In the Homeric version, he makes a deal with brother Zeus for him to abduct Zeus's daughter and his niece Persephone. They're gods, so that makes it okay. Persephone's mother Demeter is the goddess of harvest and fertility, and basically goes on a strike and blights the earth until Hades gives her her daughter back. Which he does, but only after she eats the fruit of the underworld, which for some reason means she has to spend half the year in the underworld, during which time Demeter gets sad, and that's why we have winter. So yeah, kidnapping a young girl and forcing her to marry you is kind of a dick thing to do, but again, compared to his bros, he's still less shitty. So yes, there is our mythological Hades crash course. But since he's been around for so long, he has had a good 1,000 or so years to incorporate a lot of fanon that later made its way into pop culture portrayals.